everyone, I hope you're well. I thought we might do something a little bit different today. I'm playing a little bit with a new oracle that I've developed based on a very old system called geomancy, which basically uses the premise of astrology, but it sort of bases it on the four elements. So it's very much a kind of earth-based divination system. I thought for the new moon it might be quite fun to kind of do a little divination. So this system, it does involve a little bit of maths. So what I'm going to do is we first, it happens in four phases, basically, in very much in keeping with the sort of fourfold symbolism that's kind of inherent in the in the whole oracle itself. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these cards, and I'm going to shuffle them, and I'm going to get four what you would call it, four starting cards, and these are sort of, this kind of starts off the whole system, which then the other cards are derived from this particular system. So it's from these, the initial four that we get, we then calculate the others. So so my question is, what lessons and wisdom is available to us during the waxing moon that begins on the 22nd of May. So these are made up, by the way, of 16 figures, so it's 4 times 4, and the figures are, as I say, they're based on very similar to the I Ching, where you have these kind of lines of masculine and feminine dots. So you've got 1 dot for odd and 2 dots for even, and you have 4 lines rather than the hexagram that you get in the I Ching. So it's based on 4s, and then from the combination you get these different figures that kind of come out, and they are very much based in astrological symbolism, as we'll see. So this system was very popular during the Renaissance and the medieval sort of time. So one of the most famous people to use it was someone called Cornelius Agrippa, who was an alchemist and a magician. And then later on, Robert Flood, the English occultist, was also kind of used it. And it's just it would be a bit of fun, because astrology can be a little bit sort of like cerebral sometimes, and I'm a big fan of the I Ching. I think it's it's great to have that sort of that element of chance sort of within an oracle. And so this involves less calculations than astrology does, although we do have computers now to do that. And it's also a bit more visual. So let's see what 4 cards we have. So we've got 2 that have already kind of jumped out. So one is Carse, which is associated with Capricorn. Then we've got Tristia, which is interestingly the second Saturn ruled sign. So we've got Aquarius, so you can actually see I put them on the cards. So we've got Saturn in Capricorn here, and we've got Saturn in Aquarius here, which is interesting given that Saturn is retrograde, and it's currently in the sign of Aquarius, but it's going to go back into Capricorn shortly because of its retrograde. So what else? Okay, so the next card out is Albus. So Albus is associated with Mercury in Gemini, which again fascinating, because Mercury's just gone into Gemini, and we'll be making a conjunction to Venus in Gemini at this new moon, so that's very apt. let's just get a final card. So the way that this would have worked in sort of ancient times was that people would have made marks in the sand, and they would have then added up their dots, their rows of dots, to see whether they were odd or even, and then this would have allowed them to construct the I don't know what you call them, quadragrams. But I've chosen cards instead. Okay, so that really wants to come out. Okay, so our last card is Via, which is the moon in Cancer. So again, very apt because we're talking about the moon. We're doing this reading for the new moon. So these are the 4 cards that sort of start off the they start off the reading, and we are going to then calculate the rest of the cards from that, and I use a conversion sheet to do that. So I'm just going to pause the video while I do the calculations because it's quite boring otherwise to watch, and I will be back with you shortly. So this is the casting sheet that I have developed for basically converting the 4 mothers into the 4 daughters, nieces, and then the judge and witnesses. So you can actually download it from my website, and it just helps you to kind of go through the process because it can be a little bit kind of cumbersome. So I've basically done it already, and I've now chosen the cards and put them onto the sort of casting cloth, and there's 2 ways that you can do this. So I'm using the Golden Dawn method, which is to take the 4 mothers and to use them as the cardinal houses, followed by the daughters, which are then the succedent, and then the nieces, which are the cadent houses. But you can actually just do them in order. So you can go, you know, from the first mother, and then just keep going in, you know, right through until you get to card 12, and then just put those into numeric order, basically in an anti-clockwise direction. And then the last 3 cards are the witness, the 2 witnesses, so the left and right witnesses, and the judge. And the judge is basically the outcome of the reading. So I'm going to switch over now to the casting cloth, and we can then do our interpretations of, you know, have a look at what these mean in terms of our reading. So here is the casting cloth again. And so what I've done is I've laid the cards out basically already. And this is my little booklet that I use, which sort of helps me with interpretations. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to think of this as like a horary reading. So we've got to look for strictures, and so the 2 important strictures that we need to consider in the, you know, in a reading is, first of all, is the ascendant in the via combusta. So in geomancy terms, that would mean that we would have to have the symbols here for the signs of Libra and Scorpio, because that's where the via combusta falls in the zodiac, and fortunately we don't. So we've got Carcer in the first house. We don't have either Rubeus, which is Scorpio, or Puella, which is Libra. Then we need to look at the 7th house for strictures, and usually the stricture there would be the presence of Saturn in the 7th house. So in the geomancy system, that would be Carcer, which is Saturn in Capricorn, or it would be Tristia, which is Saturn in Aquarius, and we've got neither of those in the 7th house. So we don't have any strictures that we need to worry about. So how do we then interpret the reading? Well, we need to think again in terms of horary astrology. So the querent is always the first house. This is the ascendant, and so this is us, the collective. So this can tell us something about our situation and state. And then the questited, the question that I've put is, you know, what wisdom or lessons or message does the full moon have for us? So in that case, we would look to the 3rd house is messages, and the 9th house is kind of dreams and omens, so signs from the divine, basically messages from the divine. Now it's interesting because in this particular reading, we've got Letitia in the 3rd house, and we've got Letitia in the 9th house. So these are the two houses that represent messages and signs and omens, and they both have the same symbol in them. So that to me is a really auspicious sign that the moon rejoices in the third house, and we're also being told that the message from the basically from the macrocosm is the same as for the microcosm. So you know, we kind of, it doesn't matter which house we look at, we're going to get we're being told that we're going to get an omen or a sign. And so if we just have a look at what these particular signs mean, we can then sort of take things further. So in the first house we've got Khase. Now Khase is the symbol associated, as I said, with Saturn and Capricorn. So it's associated with the element of earth, and traditionally this symbol is associated with imprisonment. So it's a sense of restriction or kind of limitation. So I'll just read you from the book the sort of keywords associated with Khase, so that you can see whether you identify with any of these. So Khase is associated with imprisonment, isolation, delays, binding confinement, borders, locks, limits, restraints, and restrictions. So in a literal sense, this is to do with prison, jail, or a cell. Now, I mean, to me this is so radical, because if we think about lockdown, is it not in a way people feeling imprisoned in their own homes, not being able to go out, being restricted in terms of movement? To me this kind of sums up where most people in the world are at some point, to some degree, as a result of COVID-19. So this to me is absolutely radical, and it shows very clearly that you know, that the chart, that this particular reading is radical. So this is us, the collective, right now feeling restricted, not just economically but also socially. We can't connect with people maybe the way that we normally would. We can't move around the way that we normally would. So this is definitely a feeling of limitation. And then if we have a look at the third house, Laitisha, which is where the moon is, we have Jupiter in the sign of Pisces. So this is actually where Jupiter is exalted. So this is water. And so I think the message here that we're getting from the moon is that we need to try to find a way, we need to try and find a silver lining, basically, despite our current restrictions. So if we look up the symbol in my booklet, the keywords for this are happiness, joy, laughter, singing, good health, enthusiasm, unrestrained gladness and optimism, grace, and a lightness of spirit. So it really is kind of asking us to find that almost unbearable lightness of being, despite our kind of external situation, to still be able to transcend it from a kind of spiritual and emotional and mental point of view, and to find you know, kind of joy in our situation. And I think, you know, here if we think about Jupiter in Pisces is really quite ethereal energy. It's you know, it's really joyful. It is associated traditionally with an upright tower or a candelabra, and so this is the sense of kind of needing to look above, to look up, you know, out of you know, there's that wonderful saying about you know, if you're in the gutter, look up at the stars, kind of thing. And I think it's the sense of from the mud comes the lotus. So we really are being asked to consider our situation, to sort of flip it on its head and to see the gifts that this particular lockdown is bringing us, whether it is time to think about what we want to do with our lives, whether it is making up with our spouse or our partner or a family member, whether it is reading those books that we've been meaning to read for ages, having the time to do things that bring us joy that we didn't have, you know, in our busy 9-to-5 lives, whether it is getting back into a healthy sort of routine, whether it's learning a new skill, because this is a great time to you know, to upskill if you can do some kind of online course, and just getting clear about where you want to be heading, you know, kind of after this lockdown is over. What do you want to be doing differently? How do you want your life to move in a sort of a better direction? How do we as a society want to sort of move in a better direction? So so that's really interesting. And then if we then consider that at this particular full moon, or new moon, the Venus and Mercury are going to be making a conjunction in Gemini, and so that's going to be one of the main sort of features of this particular new moon, one of the main signatures. So if we have a look at where Gemini is in this particular system, we would kind of go, all right, well, here is Saturn in Capricorn, so we would then do it the way that you would if you were doing astrology. You know, the first house with the ascendant kind of sets the the signs for the rest of the houses. So we then go Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini. So we get to the 6th house here, and here we have the symbol of Puer, which is associated with Mars in Aries. So this is its daytime rulership, and it's interesting that Mars here in the 6th house is actually where Mars, the planet, rejoices. So this is a very strong placement, actually. And the 6th house traditionally is associated with everyday routines. It's associated with work colleagues, with what we do on a kind of day-to-day basis. So our kind of you know, our everyday rituals, from getting up and brushing our teeth to eating our breakfast, etc., to our schedules, how we sort of plan our time. It's basically our everyday life. And to have Puer here can be read in two ways, actually. So on the one hand, we could see it as you know, kind of conflict and competition, because of course Mars is the planet of war, and it is associated with sort of like with the soldier and with conflict. So we could say, well, you know, perhaps we're getting a little bit irritated, you know, kind of being around the same people all the time, perhaps not being able to kind of go out for protracted periods or travel is sort of creating a bit of cabin fever. So there may be a sense of like irritability sort of going on here. But then on the other hand, Puer is also associated with masculine active energy. So this is about purpose, focus, and drive. So in a way, we could say that this is kind of telling us not to lose focus. So even though we're at home, not to just kind of laze around, you know, on the couch or on our phones watching TV all day, but perhaps using this time wisely. So maintaining a sense of focus, momentum, you know, maybe, as I say, reading all those books that we wanted to read, maybe getting going if we want to start an online business, you know, really sort of like making it happen, thinking about where we want to sort of, what we want to achieve on a day-to-day basis. So setting goals for ourselves every day, even though we are in lockdown. So I think that's quite interesting. And it's also very much saying, you know, kind of maintain focus. And that's important because Venus and Mercury will be making a square to Neptune. So Neptune is in the sign of Pisces. So this is, if we take that back, we've got Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. So this is the position where we find Jupiter in, you know, in Pisces in this, in the 3rd house. So that's quite fascinating. So I think, you know, if we consider that Neptune is here, it sort of symbolically speaking, then I think what it's saying is that, you know, for instance, you know, it could feel a little bit flaky to feel like we have to find our happiness, even though, you know, our livelihoods may be sort of crashing and burning, or we can't go out, and so there's a real sense of, you know, depression and that kind of thing. But I think, you know, what it's kind of telling us is that we need to sort of see through the fog, and that fog could be apathy, it could be depression, it could just be, as I said, this loss of momentum. So I think that, you know, these two things are quite strongly linked here, that we have to see this as a challenge to actually, in order to get our happiness, we very often have to maintain momentum, we have to maintain focus. Where are we going? We have to maintain discipline, you know, just that drive to sort of keep moving forward, even though we can almost be asking ourselves, what is the point? So that's really interesting. And then if we then sort of zoom in and we go, well, what is the outcome of the reading? We look here at the 2 judges, and then finally at the 2 witnesses, and then finally at the judge. So let's take the left witness first. So the left witness is conjunctio, which is the alchemical, this idea of conjunction. So we've got the astrological conjunction, which is literally happening at the new moon. The sun and the moon come together in the sign of Gemini to create the new moon. And then there's also the alchemical conjunction, which is sort of this union of opposites. And in a way, you know, you could say that the moon and the sun are essentially these sort of cosmic opposites of yin and yang. So they are kind of coming together quite literally. So I think, you know, if we read up about the keywords here for conjunctio, it tells us the same thing. So it's a union of opposites, balance, conjunction, alliance, collaboration, combined efforts, interaction, marriages, and recovery of things lost. So this is our first clue to how we can find our happiness. Now, again, as I said, being in lockdown, I think for many people is creating a lot of soul searching. We may be kind of coming back into, you know, we've now got no distractions. So we're really kind of getting in tune with what is important to us. You know, what is our purpose that we feel we're here to fulfill? Are we with the right person, for example? You know, is being sort of locked up showing us that perhaps we're kind of with, we're not with the right partner, and we're not sort of terribly happy. I mean, this is certainly something that Amicio is kind of pointing to, is almost, yes, I mean, sometimes you have, in order to work out what you want, you also have to work out what you don't want, and that's somehow how you know, sometimes how you know by default, as a kind of mirror, sort of opposite. That's sort of something to consider. But this is also about kind of coming together or cooperating. So this could be about, you know, kind of working through problems with family members or partners or spouses that we might be sort of locked up with. Really kind of, you know, those messages that we got at the pink supermoon, which were all about kind of conflict resolution, which was around Venus and Mars. So it's interesting that Venus and Mars are kind of, they're moving from their trine at the pink supermoon to their square, and so that's you know, kind of something to consider in Amicio. But the conjunctio is really positive. So this is about finding balance or harmony in opposites. So whether it is your subconscious and your conscious mind, whether it is the sort of feminine and the masculine aspects of yourself, or whether it is your heart and your head, whether it is husband and wife, or, you know, there's all these sort of opposites that are kind of being asked to sort of come together in order to create greater cooperation. And it could also be, you know, potentially teaming up with another person to, you know, to do something, you know, like some kind of business venture or a project or something like that. But certainly Mercury in Virgo is where Mercury is exalted. So I think it's again telling us to sort of get really clear about what's important to us, where we want to be heading once this lockdown is over, and also almost kind of learning to express ourselves in a way that is sort of very clear and tangible, because this is an earth sign, of course. And then we've got another lot of earth energy here in the form of Amicio. Now this is Venus in Taurus, so this is where Venus has a domicile, and this is very much about self-worth. So if we think about Venus in Taurus, it's kind of what's tangible, material. This is kind of external, real kind of earth stuff. And if we read up on the keywords for Amicio, this is about transience, loss, breakups, separations, what is unattainable or just out of reach. But it's also about to reject, leave, decline, lose, or be stranded. It can be about self-destructiveness, and it can also be about theft or financial ruin. And, you know, I think on a very literal level, it's quite clear that lockdown has, for some people, resulted in financial ruin. People have lost their jobs, they've been made redundant. So there is a sense of loss. There's no getting away from that. Also, lockdown has definitely caused conflict for some people. You know, sometimes, in some cases, people have been locked up with abusive partners. Or I just think, you know, if you've been using the distraction of everyday life not to sort of potentially deal with the fact that you're not happy in a partnership, for example, lockdown has really force people to sort of come to terms and face that fact. And there has been quite a lot of you know, breakups of relationships and that kind of thing as a result of, you know, what's happened. So there's no kind of getting away from this. But the upside is that it is showing us what we don't want, and therefore putting us onto the path for what we do want. And this is the sort of silver lining of this particular message, because the outcome is Fortuna Major. Now this is one of the most positive symbols that you can get in geomancy. So it's associated with the sun in Leo, which is where the sun is at home. So this is kind of king energy. This is the south, this is summer, so it's kind of where the sun is at its most at its kind of culmination of heat, basically. So it's just past the summer solstice. It's now into August, and this is the kind of summer months. And in geomancy, it's associated with really wonderful things, actually. So let's have a read here. So Fortuna Major is great fortune, good luck, power, effortless success, social mobility, winning disposition, victory, inner strength, and natural charisma. So it's interesting because the symbol for it is actually the opposite of a missio. So a missio symbol is of a pouch that's been turned upside down and all the coins are falling out. So this is kind of the financial loss that not just people and businesses but also governments are feeling. But then here we've got Fortuna Major is a pouch open at the top, able to receive gifts, and it's also associated with a fertile valley with a river flowing out. Now, of course, in ancient Egypt, the sort of summer solstice would have coincided with the inundation of the Nile. So this is when the waters from the Nile come down from the highlands, I think in Ethiopia, towards the Nile delta and to the Mediterranean, and as a result the Nile used to sort of flood its banks, and this would bring fertile soil from the Ethiopian highlands into sort of the desert sands of Egypt, and you know, crops could be grown, and so it's associated with abundance, basically. And so I think it's really saying that even though it doesn't seem like it now, and even though we might be really irritated, everything is actually unfolding as it should. We are on track, and that we have to go through this process. It's almost like a kind of an alchemical dark night of the soul, so the Negredo, in order to slough off what is not necessary, realizing what is transient. I mean, material wealth is transient, certainly not something we can take with us, you know, into the world of spirit. And so I think it's showing us that we need to sort of really kind of get into alignment with what is truly important, slough off what is holding us back or blinding us to what is important, and that this will bring with it major gifts. So this is almost the end of the alchemical process when ladies turn to gold. And it's interesting that gold is of course associated with Fortuna Major and with the sun. So this is fire, the symbol of fire. This is the element associated with spirit. So I think that what it's telling us is that we can really potentially reap tremendous spiritual gifts as a result of lockdown, if we open ourselves up to seeing the silver lining in amongst all the dark clouds. So I think that's a wonderful message to be getting through at the new moon in Gemini. I hope you've enjoyed this reading. I'd be very interested to hear what you think, because obviously this is the first time I've done a geomantic reading, you know, on video. So I'd love your feedback. Do leave some comments in the sort of down below, or send me a message via my website. I'd love to hear what you think. But I hope this has been helpful. Sending you lots of new moon greetings, and I'll catch you again soon for my astrological forecast for the upcoming eclipses.